Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. The blockade at Naboo was a failure for the Trade Federation because of a cheap trick. Some hotshot pod racer managed to fly inside of the blockade's droid control ship and destroy it from within with some proton torpedoes. And as a result, every B-1 battle droid in the Trade Federation security force on Naboo was rendered inactive. Now, in the Trade Federation's defense, their security forces lack the experience to properly carry out this type of planetary invasion and occupation. After all, this was a corporate shipping conglomerate, and their security forces and naval vessels were all basically designed to combat pirates. They only really started heavily arming their ships thanks to the Stark Hyperspace War a decade earlier. The conflict had led to loosened restrictions on what type of armaments could be placed on mercantile ships for defensive purposes. By the way, guys, if you want to know how the Trade Federation turned into the evil corporation we see during the Clone Wars, take a look at one of our recent videos where we go through its early history and how it deviated from its original mission to actually protect trade from monopolization and cartels. You know what they say, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. When Nute Gunray and the Neimoidians took over the Trade Federation Directorate Board, this clearly represented a change in the way the Trade Federation did business. These individuals no longer wanted to just protect their shipping lanes, they were willing to use their massive security army to actually enforce their will on other corporations and planets even. In the time leading up to the Separatist crisis, corporations like the Trade Federation used their security army in the same way large corporations in our own world use teams of lawyers. These aren't just safety measures designed to protect the company from lawsuits or attacks, they're actually designed to generate money like any other department within the company. So what if Nute Gunray had actually upgraded the B-1 battle droids before invading Naboo? What if he turned them into the still relatively dumb but independent B-1 battle droids we see during the Clone Wars that cannot just be shut down when some kid conveniently destroys their control ship? And what if Nute Gunray secretly upgraded his security force, which would make sense. This is an insider secret for the corporation. Like, you don't really want anyone outside of your corporation knowing the biggest weakness of your entire security force.
We will send what pilots we have to knock out the droid control ship orbiting the planet.
Well, let's take a look at the direct consequences of this change here. If the Naboo carry out the same exact plan as they did in Episode 1, a few things will happen. The entire Gungan army would surrender like they did in the movie, and a great percentage of them will have died on the battlefield. But now they're going to be prisoners for a much longer time, and we're not really sure if the Separatist Droid Army actually took prisoners. But we do know that keeping prisoners alive and healthy costs a lot of money. And the Trade Federation, well, they're pretty cheap. Also, the Gungans up until this point were seen as a secondary race on Naboo. It was only the humans who really had any connection to the wider galaxy. So if, say, a bunch of Gungans went missing and were, kept in some kind of prison camp, I don't think people in the core would actually care. Jar Jar Binks' appointment to the Galactic Senate was seen as a huge step for his people later on after the invasion. Of course, that wouldn't happen either. Jar Jar would end up in shackles or even in a worse situation. On top of that, the real reason why the Trade Federation wanted Naboo in the first place was because of its extensive plasma reserves beneath the surface, most of which could be found flowing inside of subterranean tunnels. The Gungan society was powered by this plasma and could help the Trade Federation further exploit these resources by letting them know exactly where they were. This would save the Trade Federation a lot of money. They no longer would have to survey the entire planet looking for these resources. And of course, having Gungans as a bargaining chip would definitely not hurt their chances of convincing the Gungans to help them in their economic pursuits. Then we have the Naboo Pilots who attempt to try and destroy the droid control ship. This was clearly the weakest part of Padme Amidala's plan. And this is kind of almost why I wish the Trade Federation's droid army was decentralized, because ultimately Anakin's accidental destruction of the control ship was just way too cheap and unbelievable. Anakin could still, of course, blow up the droid control ship in this scenario, and it would cause short-term confusion, but ultimately those starfighters were outnumbered something like 1 to 40, if not more. There was no way they were going to make it back to the surface of the planet alive. And so yes, that 10-year-old Anakin Skywalker piloting a starfighter for the first time in a combat situation heavily outnumbered would probably die, as is what's typical in these type of situations. Anakin Skywalker has a pretty big role in galactic history during this time period, so we'll talk a little bit more about how his death would change the future. Now, the most solid part of Padme's plan also consequently happens to be the one she's a part of. She takes a small team of Naboo royal guards and police and attack the palace with the goal of capturing Nute Gunray and forcing him and the Trade Federation to surrender their forces. Padme somehow manages to pull off this part of the operation all by herself, sans Jedi and sans magically chosen children. This would be the only successful part of the entire operation. I mean, sure, Obi-Wan Kenobi still wins his duel against Maul, but Qui-Gon Jinn will still fall. But the real important thing here is Padme will have control over New Gunray. Neimoidians are generally cowards, and they treasure their own lives quite a lot. They are, after all, an insect-like species and start out their lives as grubs in communal daycare centers, which are essentially like a mix between Hunger Games and Squid Games. It's not great, and those who make it to adulthood are usually amongst the most ruthless and desperate to survive. So threaten the life of someone like Nute Gunray, and I'm sure he'll give you everything he has, including signing a treaty which includes the withdrawal of all Trade Federation forces from the planet of Naboo. Now, obviously, it is possible that Nute Gunray would just see right through Padme's bluff, or is she bluffing? Nute Gunray might have his underlings besiege the palace with vulture droids and ground forces, which would obviously complicate the situation. But then again, Padme Amidala might not be the type of individual who will give up. I mean, all of her soldiers could be dead. It could just be her and Nute Gunray left, and she'll still be standing there holding a vibroblade to his neck with every intention of using it. You know, powerful, radical, and extreme people like Padme are very dangerous when they are desperate. The Trade Federation could, I guess, use Gungan soldiers they captured as a bargaining chip for Nute Gunray and try to appeal to Padme's humanity. But then again, didn't the Queen just ruthlessly send the Royal Gungan Army and a bunch of her own fighter pilots to a certain death? Or is Padme Amidala just an incompetent military leader? Jury's out on that one. Now, in this situation, Anakin Skywalker dies somewhere above Naboo and probably skips out on a very miserable and tragic life. The Chosen One, along with Qui-Gon Jinn, are gone, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is left without any friends. Darth Sidious also now has to contend with the fact that his options for future Sith apprentices is now limited to individuals like Maul and Darth Tyrannus, which is not exactly ideal. Darth Sidious would actually mentor Anakin Skywalker secretly throughout his entire career in the Jedi Order. He would oftentimes invite the young boy to his office and show him things, or take him on trips to the Undercity of Coruscant and teach him lessons. Palpatine represented all of the possibilities that the Jedi restricted from Anakin Skywalker, which is why the young Jedi ultimately spent more and more time with Palpatine. Anakin would also serve as the linchpin for Palpatine's plans. He would secretly leak the fact that he was a dark side Force user to Anakin, knowing that the young man would probably tell the Jedi, but also be deeply conflicted with turning against an old friend and mentor. Now, obviously, it's possible that Darth Sidious could have instigated Order 66 in a different way. But it almost seems perfect with how things played out, with Anakin ultimately cutting off Mace Windu's arm right as he was about to assassinate Darth Sidious. In one fell swoop, Anakin fell, Sidious had his reason for attacking the Jedi, and the galaxy became a safer place for Force-sensitive babies. Okay, maybe not. So what exactly are the consequences of Nute Gunray basically changing the droid into a less independent format? Well, a more realistic story and a much more impressive victory on Padme's behalf. If you really think about it, the droid control ship is kind of redundant if you have control of the viceroy of the entire Trade Federation. Anakin's plot armor-laden journey to the center of the control ship was pretty much unnecessary to begin with. Although now, without this moment in history during the Battle of Umbara, Fives, Hardcase, and Jesse won't try to copy Anakin's tactics, and Hardcase won't die on a Confederacy ship because their operation didn't go exactly according to plan. So there you have it, guys. One little upgrade to the Droid Army and the fate of the galaxy would have probably changed pretty drastically. This is why it's always important when playing an RPG to carefully invest in skill trees that you'll actually use. That's your tip for the day, I guess. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you are watching this, you are Generation Tech.